Let's render an object in 3ds Max that we can realistically composite into a live background plate. For my background plate, I will choose a still image for simplicity of this lesson. One thing you want to make sure is that the image size is going to be the same as your rendered image size. So in this case, I've cropped this picture down to 1920 by 1080. In 3ds Max, I'm going to set up an image viewport. So I'll just click on the viewport menu in the upper left-hand corner of the viewport. I'm going to use a perspective viewport for this one. And we're going to select viewport background and configure viewport background. I'm going to select to use Now let's set up an image viewport background. I'll click on realistic in the viewport menu and select viewport background and configure viewport background. From the pop-up menus, I'll select the use files radio button and click on the files button. Now I'll go ahead and find my image. And click OK. Now a couple things I want to do. In render setup, as I mentioned, you want to make sure this image is rendered to the same size as your viewport background, which in this case, as I mentioned, is 1920 by 1080, which is HD TV. So we have that set up. And the last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show the safe frames just to make sure that everything looks right, which it does. Now we're going to create a plane for the ground floor. After you create your plane, go in the perspective view and adjust your perspective view until your plane essentially matches your floor. Now let's set up some lighting to match the scene. Of course, you'll have to be familiar with your environment. In this case, the classroom has banks of lights throughout. So we're going to go ahead and create some free lights. I'm going to put one free light in there. Make sure the shadows are on, and we're using ray trace shadows. For this free light, I'm going to use a rectangle shape. And I'll scale it up just a little bit. And lift it off the ground. Now I'm going to go ahead and copy it. Best way to copy it is with my move tool. I'm just going to hold down shift and drag out a second light. Make sure to make this an instance, not a copy, because with an instance I can just change the one master light and all the other instance lights will change at the same time. And we may need to do that just to get the right amount of lights. So one more time. Now I've got about 6 banks of lights that I should be able to work with just fine. Next step is create an object. Keep this nice and simple. I'm going to just make a cylinder right here on the ground. Now let's go check the lighting. my first light is set at 1500 foot candles, which might be enough for itself, but since we have 6 other lights in here, I'm going to reduce this quite a bit. I'm going to bring it down to just about 200 foot candles. That should get a pretty good look. Finally, we don't want this floor material to actually show up, but we do want the reflections and shadows of the object in it. So in order to handle that in the slate material editor, I'm going to use a mental ray material called matte shadow reflection. And all it does is show the matte shadows and reflections of the object once you render it in mental ray. I'm also going to grab an Arc and Design real quickly, and I'll grab a brushed metal and assign that to our object. Now let's go ahead and render. See how this looks. Okay, we have the render is finished. And if you want to, you can see the alpha channel, what's going to show through. We've got the shadows in there, which is good. We're going to save this as a ping file. Make sure you save it as a ping because we do need that alpha channel in there. And now we'll go back to Photoshop. We'll just file and we'll place, and just place that file right on top. See how it looks there. And of course, we'll go back and modify the lighting or the reflections on the floor material if needed to make it look more realistic.